I'm John Honeycutt, a doctoral student with Liberty University Online. Today I'm going to take you through a presentation that I selected that I believe is quite important and can be helped with industrial and organizational psychologists. Specifically, it centers around the very high turnover rate within the CPS system. Child Protective Services has a lot of processes and a lot of people involved, and sometimes it gets quite complex. So what the outline will take you through is the children, which is ultimately the most important part of this whole presentation. By understanding what the children circumstances are and what the CPS worker needs to facilitate, the complexities of the job become a little bit more apparent. Then we'll take a look at the jobs themselves and the interactions and interplay with the different processes that are crucial to keeping the children safe. Next, we'll take a look at the literature, and I've grouped them into three categories that I'll describe when we get there. Last, we'll take a summary of everything that we've heard, identify some gaps, and I'll accept your questions through email or otherwise if you have them. So let's identify why. Why is this so crucial? Well, children are frequently neglected, and 78% of the time that a child is removed from their home temporarily or longer than temporarily, it's because of neglect, either emotional or physical neglect. That's in the lower right-hand corner. Now, these other bullet points are also reasons, and some of them are quite alarming, and most of us are aware that it happens, but we oftentimes don't think of it. We don't consider it as we go along with our daily lives. So in the case of some of the more severe things like domestic violence and drug and alcohol use, that is, for an extended period of time, the child may not return to their parent for a considerable period. The notion of reunification is always the goal, but sometimes it's just not appropriate or possible. Now, in a child's lifetime, 1 out of 3 have an investigation. It doesn't mean that they're removed from their home, but there's an investigation that somebody anonymously or otherwise reported a concern. Now, investigations take paperwork and time, effort, energy, and it's something that the CPS workers do regularly, is conduct investigations and identify that there's not now an immediate need for removal, but it'll be documented. 1 in 7 in their lifetime will be placed in the foster system, even if it's only for a few weeks, but some it's for the remainder of their young lives until they reach emancipation or the age of majority. Confirmed maltreatment is 1 in 8, and while it's rare, about 1 out of 100 children are removed from their home permanently with parental rights taken away from their mom and dad. Now, increasingly, if you look on this bar chart where it says relative, this is a kinship placement, and increasingly there's a trend, instead of going with foster families that are absolutely an important part of this equation, kinship placements don't take as long and they tend to be more stable for the child. Group homes are where many of the preteens and teens end up because the foster families are less inclined to take on a teen for a variety of reasons. Now, at present, and for the last several years, there's about 450,000 youth and children that are in out-of-home care, which OHC, out-of-home care, is more commonly used in the literature. The average stay is almost a year, and frequently a child will enter the system, go back with their parent for a while and then will re-enter the system. The next few slides I will include some ideas from Erik Erikson, which likely you're familiar with, but I'll put the words on the screen as we go by age. But of the 450,000 out-of-home care children, 135,000 are adopted each year. So there's a churn. Those 135,000 that find forever homes will be replaced with another 135,000 that come into the system over the course of that same 12 months. Now notice on this chart that both ratio-wise and in absolute number-wise, 2-year-olds are adopted the most. And at age 3 all the way through age 17, there's a pretty steep decline. At age 10, when there's an increase in the number of youth in the system, there continues being a drop in the number of those youth that are adopted. And that presents an issue for a lot of reasons, and we can go through a few of those. Now, infants, newborns through 2-year-olds and toddlers, are developing attachment. And this, especially in instances of neglect, that can cause some issues with attachment theory on trust, mistrust. And then the 2-year-olds are more commonly adopted, but some of those residuals remain with them for a while. The 3 to 5-year-olds have the autonomy shame Erikson's ideas, and oftentimes there's some impulse control if there's been prolonged neglect, as well as some delays in language development. Now, there's very much an aim to get this age group, in all, but especially with this age group, to be placed in kinship care. It provides a greater degree of stability, and the probability of reunification increases. With the 6 to 11-year-olds, one of the issues that a foster care professional needs to deal with, as well as the family that might be bringing them into their home, is the notion of medical records, which are sometimes not kept well, sometimes they're not available at all. And for enrolling in school, this can be a difficulty. Operational defiance, it's not always present with these youth, but operational defiance and truth-telling can be an issue at times. With the teenagers that are going through identity, there's quite frequently many bounces, as it's called, or different placements that a teen has had over the course of their young life. And so there's a hesitancy to build strong friendships because of the likelihood, in their opinion, of being placed somewhere else. So friendships are difficult to form. And also with older children, they might have some younger siblings that are in the system that are adopted ahead of them, or are just placed at a different foster home that was willing to take them, because generally teens have less of a chance to be placed in a foster home. Then a real unfortunate, and the statistics are terrible, is reaching the age of majority as a foster child. These young people that are turning legal adults are street smart quite frequently, but very unprepared to become an adult on their own. And we'll take a look at some statistics here on the next page about this. But from a CPS worker's standpoint, especially one that has have some tenure, may have a long-term relationship with one of these youth, and is greatly concerned as they age out, and that can cause stress and heartache. So the statistics are that about 23,000, and that's a very defensible number. Some research says 35,000, but 23,000 would be the baseline that any of the literature would have age out every year. And you'll notice that the ages are 17 to 20, and that's because some states have elongated the age of emancipation, allowing young adults to stay somewhat supported for a period of time. Now, these are alarming statistics. Out of 23,000, 11,000 will not have gainful employment until the age of 24. And for females, if you'll notice, if you cut the 23,000 in half, 11 to 12,000 young ladies, 8,400 of them will become pregnant by the age 21. Out of the 23,000, only 700 will attain a college degree, and all of these young people deserve better. That's not what this presentation's about, but you can understand that a professional that's in the Child Protective Services business is greatly concerned about their teens that they have had care of that are aging out and going on to their own. So the expression of vicarious trauma is very real with very young children to the aging out, emerging adults. There's a lot of experiences that a CPS worker has dealt with and takes home with them quite frequently, and even on 24-hour calls at times. So in the middle of this image are some of the items that the youth might be struggling with from infancy through age of emancipation. Now we're going to shift gears and we're going to talk about the work itself. And 35% turnover nationwide in this industry, which honestly it harms the children in a variety of ways, and that's described in the literature. But you can imagine that if a child becomes accustomed to a particular worker and attaches to them, and they leave, then that child has to learn a new personality that's responsible for shepherding them. So this 35% turnover, it's not just a cost burden to the organizations themselves, although it is that too. It's mostly about the kids. So this model, we're going to break it down one piece at a time and describe it. Prevention is not always included in a county or state's efforts. One of the pieces of research we'll take a look at has to do with prevention, and there's oftentimes just lip service paid to this, even though the caseworkers wish that it weren't. The investigations take paperwork and time, and the heartache is actually removing a child from their home, which sometimes is late at night and even under dangerous circumstances. The next piece, I'm going to call this very paperwork heavy. So case planning, court hearings, permanency, and termination of rights require a lot of time, effort, energy from the professionals in this industry. As far as court hearings go, our professionals have no say-so on when the court date and time is set, so that's required to work around. Now we'll talk about placement. There's a variety of placement options. There's temporary placements on an emergency basis, foster placement, which most people are somewhat familiar with. Guardianship is a little bit in between foster and relative care. This would be an adult that is responsible for managing an estate, for example, or having some medical decisions that are assigned to them. Relative care or kinship care, as I've mentioned before, is increasingly becoming the placement of choice for stability, if nothing else, but also the process can be accelerated. And for teens, group placement or group homes is where a lot of young teenagers and emerging adults land, and that has some struggles on its own. Now, there's a relationship between the foster placements and the development of foster families, and in another group within this organizational system. And that would include recruiting potential foster families, screening, doing background checks, and home inspections are not a small deal. Sometimes a family that's just a great family that could be added to the list needs to make adjustments to their home. For example, a minor issue might be electric outlets need to be covered up in case a very young child comes. The training is not a small deal either. Frequently that's over several days, and things like fingerprinting. And so once a foster family is gone through all the certifications, there's the notion of matching with a child. And during the screening process, foster adults have the opportunity of describing what they would prefer to accept and what they would just be unwilling to accept. So that puts some limitations on the matching process. And that forms a relationship with the caseworkers responsible for children versus those that are recruiting and getting foster families in the pipeline. So this is what it looks like, somewhat big picture. Your unification is always the goal, but here is something that is a frustrating truth with child welfare workers. There's others that are in the mix: judges, attorneys, counselors, child advocates, law enforcement, probation officers, and sometimes the parents and kin also. And all of these individuals have a say in the disposition of the child. And we're going to look at a piece of literature where it calls voice. One of the frustrations of the professionals is their voice not being heard in the mix of all of these other personalities and individuals. Let's shift gears now into the literature. And in the industries, there are two industry groups that I want to point out are similar to the jobs that a caseworker would have. There's also some studies, not many that I pulled out, but a few from other countries, and lots of studies that are state-specific. And the approaches are shown on the right-hand side. Should be unsurprising that it's covering almost all of the different kinds of approaches that could be taken on an article or a journal article or research. So the data gathering, to be complete, for all of those pieces of literature come from longitudinal correlations, facilitated sessions, questionnaires, self-report, and interviews for the qualitative studies. So this first group we're going to look at, and we're going to look at three groups. I call these adjacent youth services practices. So in all instances, these are within the same organization, but they are processes that are not directly related to turnover. And these are investigated to see if there's some best practices that we can glean from inside of CPS that is, the research was not targeting turnover. So in Estonia, which is surprisingly similar to the state of Maine, both in population density, square miles, there's English spoken there, and the child protective services are somewhat analogous to the states, not exactly, but somewhat. And so aside from FERPA, this particular collaboration that happens in Estonia is a best practice that we might be able to draw from in the States in some ways. Specifically, this deals with nursery children and preschoolers, and there's a collaboration between the nursery schools and caseworkers that dialogue goes back and forth. Now, in the States, it really could only be one way rather than two. Nonetheless, that collaboration is a theme that we're going to see throughout the literature review. In Alabama, it was really just a descriptive study, but ethnicity is also a theme that we're going to see. When there is a shared ethnicity between the caseworker and the parent in particular, the relationship bonds are stronger and can be, reunification tends to happen sooner and more frequent. So attentiveness towards ethnicity on this Alabama study likely would be extensible to other parts of the country. A longitudinal study that was performed on the aging out process doesn't give us much insight into turnover, except that it shows that there are stresses that would be put on caseworkers with children that are soon to age out. There was a quantitative study within CPS done in the States. It was nationwide with counties that were selected. I think 36 states were covered in this particular analysis. And unsurprisingly, I suppose, but another theme throughout this research is the importance of supervisors. When a supervisor is good, satisfaction goes up. When a supervisor is not preferred, the satisfaction goes down, and with satisfaction goes turnover. So the quantitative analysis is very supportive of the premise that supervisors are crucial in this dialogue. There was a U.S.-Canadian meta-analysis that also centered on transitioning young adults. And what this showed is that most transition efforts on independent living, the IL that you see there, fail. And this is an issue that's outside of the scope here, with the exception, again, that a caseworker can be stressed over one of the young people that they will no longer have authoritative responsibility with and for. In Kansas, there was a study that was qualitative. It required a lot of interviews, and it was about trauma responsiveness as opposed to trauma informed. And the trauma responsive programs that were attempted to be implemented, those that went well had organizational change management as a part of the program, and those that did not do well omitted organizational change management. And so that's a gleaning we can get from work that's outside of turnover itself, but in programs to be successful rolled out within CPS. Now, a second group that I'm calling adjacent human services. These are in industries that are similar to the CPS, and Aronis, down at the bottom, 2009, establishes that there are similarities in the workforce and the type of work and the inclinations of staff that are in healthcare, education, and in some other public sector roles. So we're going to take a look at healthcare in three different ways. This was about the healthcare. This was a nursing home. And there was a test to see if small teams worked better than just having the staff work all over the nursing home wherever the need was. And there was a significant increase in job satisfaction by using smaller teams where communication and collaboration could happen. The notion of person-centered care, which is when doctors and nurses and other providers collaborate, and that's a theme that we're going to get towards the end here, is collaboration and communication. So person-centered care drives up satisfaction in this study. Leadership and respect is concatenated with some other studies. So leadership, when the leadership is strong and looking after the staff, there's an increase in job satisfaction and a decrease in an inclination to leave. Also with that is respect, which has several different definitions, but part of that is just simply affirmation for a job that is well done. Educators have a lot of intersection with caseworkers. They deal with the same age group, they deal with the same emotions and motiveness, and they have responsibility for the youth during a period of time. Now, in this particular study, tenure was a factor. So teachers that have just 1 or 2 years experience are more likely to leave than those with significantly longer tenure. Also, the notion of how one is certified matters. So alternative certification, which is becoming a high need in many states, is a higher likelihood of turnover. The other item, which does map to CPS, is when one's degree is outside of the scope of what they're teaching. So for example, if a certified English teacher were called in to teach math or vice versa, there's job dissatisfaction, which might drive the tendency to leave. And that's true also in child protective services. When an individual joins with a social sciences degree, the likelihood that they're going to stick longer is higher than if the degree is outside of that domain. This was a longitudinal study that was quite broad and quite extensive. Now, a Dutch study in the Netherlands was in the public sector, and it identified prosocial motivation, which is sometimes compassion, satisfaction. And so there's a couple of ways to measure this, and when there is a prosocial bent towards a professional, there tends to be a little bit of mitigation when other things are uncomfortable. So this is something that potentially we could do here in the States, and it's analogous to strengths-based administration. In the public sector here, there was a theoretical study on the optimal turnover rates. Now, rather than giving a percentage, which the name is a little bit misleading, what's done here is to identify that high turnover tends to replace experienced professionals with inexperienced professionals, and there's a depreciation of average talent, if you will, or a dilution of the capabilities. And when that dilution happens, it also makes the attitudes and the job loads for those that have been around higher. Once again, organization change management came into play in the public sector. This was a quantitative analysis, and it was done in Oklahoma. If we connect the two groups that are adjacent to the primary group that we're looking at, we can see that there's some commonalities. This next page will draw them more clearly. When we blend them together, good supervisors make a positive difference. Collaborations and small teamwork works well. Inclusiveness and attentiveness towards ethnicity, as well as the degree that one has, can increase satisfaction. And when we implement change and programs, organization change management is imperative to apply and be part of the program. The next several studies that we'll look at are right in the sweet spot. It's U.S. turnover within the child welfare system. And we'll identify some themes here and compare them to the ones we just reviewed. In the U.S., this study by Phillips identified that the 30% turnover and 2-year average was partially driven by metrics, where the caseworkers were sort of heavy-handedly managed autocratically and told what to do, where to go, and when to go, and they weren't able to manage their time. It was mandated time and time frames, and some of them are important. For example, a caseworker typically visits a home that's been investigated, for example, or where a child's been reunified once every 30 days. In Ohio, there was a study from Shadik. It's just recently, in the last 6 months it was published, and poor supervision came into being where there was a lot of burnout. A mitigating factor with the professionals that had a high level of compassion satisfaction seemed to do better on the burnout than those that did not. And just as a point, the large majority of caseworkers are female, so there's not many studies that distinguish male from female in the outcomes of the study, but this one did, and it turns out that compassion satisfaction did not alter burnout for men. It was regardless of that score. With the female population, those that had a high CS score had less burnout. And this was a mixed method study. The next one by Shipe just happened about 3 years ago. And this is interesting because it was a mixed study that honed in on alternative response. And the initial questionnaires that were quantitative identified this as an other, the notion of alternative response. And so the qualitative portion of this study honed in on AR. And what was discovered is that caseworkers appreciate AR. This is when they go to homes and build relationships ahead of the fact, and instead of after the fact, where there's a probable issue that could take place. The caseworker goes and visits the parent and establishes some preemptive ideas. Now, the issue with AR is that it's not aligned with the goals of supervisors and upper management that are looking for, I'll call it checking the box. And so this particular study had an interesting finding that if AR were truly supported, it would likely yield a improved result for caseworkers appreciating their job. And just as an ancillary finding from this, there was no particular reason identified, but rural workers seem to have greater satisfaction than urban workers. Another mixed study that happened in a similar sense, the quantitative piece identified voice, and specifically voice suppression. So when voice suppression takes place, motivation for the job goes way down. And voice suppression can come from attorneys and judges, that list that we saw earlier, as well as parents and school teachers, counselors. And so the voice is sometimes suppressed, and if there were affirmation given, the motivation would remain kind of level. But when the voice is suppressed and there's no affirmation, it causes a decrease in motivation and an increase in inclination to leave. A quantitative study from Zetlin in 2023, again just about 6 months ago, had a high number of participants. It was almost 2,000 that were in this quantitative study around job satisfaction and the prediction for intention to stay. So while it's not in this study itself, it doesn't take a major leap to identify that job satisfaction, if it is influenced, say, by supervisors, a good supervisor, increasing job satisfaction, increases the intention to stay. And in a wide variety of other studies, intention to stay is a predictor of actually staying or not staying. And this was done in New Jersey. From Katari, in Oregon, there was a reasonably large sample of almost 500, and the findings here is that workload, travel time, and severity of cases all negatively influenced a desire to stay. So many caseworkers are at capacity or over capacity that they're able to manage. Travel time, especially in some situations, can be extensive, and when a caseload has a number of severe cases, that also can add to the stress. This on hope theory is quite interesting. Hope theory is similar to resilience. It is similar to strengths-based. It's similar to grit. It has a little bit of each one of those things associated with it. But the outcome of this is when hope theory was applied compared to resilience, hope gave a stronger correlation of job satisfaction. And this can be summarized kind of in, I want to accomplish a good goal, and I'm able to accomplish a good goal, and I will accomplish a good goal. And when the goals are aligned with an individual and the organization, especially in this line of work, hope that you can make a difference, and realizing that difference motivates the professionals. And this last one is about compassion and burnout. When our caseworkers are exposed to secondary trauma, which is frequent, there's an increase in burnout. There are some things like hope theory and affirmations that can mitigate, but mostly on secondary trauma, the self-care is recommended, and quite frequently that's absent from an emphasis in some counties, in some parts of the organization. Good supervisors, humor among colleagues, friendships within the unit, and self-care are all helpful in improving intent to stay. So now if we combine what worsens and improves on child welfare turnover themes, so the studies that are right in the sweet spot that we just looked at, you can see some trends that are on both sides. This next page will group them together. So poor supervision versus good supervision, the very first line. Mixed messages in the instance of AR, alternative response, when there's a program put in, but it's not really supported by leadership. Mandated times versus reducing red tape, And down at the bottom, secondary trauma can be mitigated through hope-centered policy and also encouraging self-care. So we have 4 groups. We have worsened turnover, improved turnover, with the studies that are in the sweet spot of turnover within the agency. And we have similar agencies, turnover within similar agencies, and best practices from other CPS studies. When we put those together, we can see that the adjacent groups and the within groups have a lot of themes that are common. The notion of streamlining expectations in the middle needs to be accompanied by organization change management. And the theme throughout here is supervision. So here are the major themes of all things put together. Collaboration and small teamwork improve the desire to stay. Any programs that are implemented need to be done with organization change. Good supervisors make a positive difference. Shared ethnicity between the caseworker and the parents improves that relationship markedly and also ups the probability of reunification. The notion of attentively promoting ethnic social professionals is important, because one of the reasons for deteriorated motivation is there's not visibility of leadership that coincides with one's ethnicity. The notion of a degree that is in alignment with the work. And the last one is pro-social attributes that are within the small organization. So these are the gaps, and we'll go through these somewhat one group at a time. There's 4 general gaps. The first one is to streamline processes. This can get reduce red tape, it can reduce frustrations, it could reduce paperwork, and to also provide processes for small group work and collaboration and friendships, embedded with organization change management to put those programs in place. Supervisor training is clearly a gap coming from all of the literature. So the notion of having supervisor training in better communication, in the simple act of affirmation, and implementing an endeared hope-centered policy that's actually enforced and supported. Ethnic professionals as leaders is an extremely important focus that needs to take place, both hiring from the outside and promoting from within. And then the other item on ethnicity is matching the professional with the clients or the parents, which has improved outcomes. And lastly, the notion of alternative response, which bubbled up as a very innovative kind of idea, but unfortunately was not supported well. So if we had a different level of support from management and supervisors on AR, this could decrease the work downstream and also increase the workers' appreciation for their jobs. So that's it, and I appreciate your time. The next few slides, I'll just run through them. They are the references and citations. I think there's 4 or 5 pages of them, but I can email these to you if you'd like. And I won't show them on screen long, but here's the A through B citations. B and C. H through J. K through M. I think there's 2 more pages. R through V. And the last page is just Z. So once again, thank you very much for your time. I hope that this enlightened you a bit on the industry of caseworkers and the child protective discipline. And I hope that I get to have an email or something similar from you for questions that I might be able to clarify. In the between now and then, I hope you have a blessed day.